Hello, and welcome back to the Heathen Trans Girl podcast with me, your host, Kaya Fox. I was all too excited to start this episode to wait a whole week. So we're going to have 2 episodes this week. And this one is focusing on the Oseberg Ship Burial. It is one of the most well-known and best preserved ship burials from the Viking Age. It is so gorgeous, every aspect of it. Little bit of a graphic content warning I will give as we get further into it, into some of the more gory stuff. I will let you know as that is coming up. But this ship burial is a treasure trove of wealth and information about Viking Age practices, as distinct and unique as each burial was to the individuals. I feel like we can still learn a lot from this ship burial. So many of the artifacts, the ship itself, the wagons and the sleighs that were there, the way the chamber was laid out are so gorgeous. And I hope through this episode to give you a little bit of a story of the discovery of this ship, as well as maybe describing what it would have been like to be there for this burial process to happen. Imagine with me for a moment that you are a farmer in Norway in the early 1900s, and there is a big hill on your property, and it is a known Viking Age burial mound. And the past owner of this farm attempted to dig into it and died fairly soon after. And the locals seem to think that the past owner died because they unleashed a plague of sorts, or tapped into something that was not supposed to be uncovered. But curious and brave as you are, you decide to do a little digging into this mound. And as you dig, your shovel scrapes upon something that feels different than the earth around it. You get down onto your hands and knees and brush the dirt away from what appears to be a piece of wood with intricate carvings on it. And you're not sure exactly what it is, but you know that it's something. And so you take it to the nearest big town, being Oslo, and bring it to someone who can identify it. Now, this farmer's name was Oscar Rom, and the year was 1903. It was fall, August, and he brought this piece of wood, this carved artifact, into the archaeologist, Gabriel Gustafsson, who showed immediate interest. And even though the next day was his birthday, Gabriel Gustafsson went out on his birthday to this farm and began the process of unearthing what would become known as the Oseberg Ship Burial. Now, the piece of wood that Oskaram found would end up being identified as one of the very top pieces of the figurehead, one of the tallest points on the ship that was sticking up close to the surface. But so much more was revealed as Gabriel Gustafsson and his team dug down into the earth to reveal this ship burial. Gustafsson and his team dug a pit about 150 feet long, deep into this blue clay, and there was a little bit of water at the bottom, so it all became muddy. The ship itself that they uncovered was situated so that it was facing the fjord and moored to a very large stone. Seemed to be put there to keep it in place. Now, both the prow and the stern, the front and the back of the ship, have these gorgeous spiraling serpent figureheads, and the carvings dive elegantly into this long and wide ship. The ship itself was about 70 feet long and about 16 feet wide, and had 15 holes for oars on either side, so 30 oars altogether. Now, the ship itself was dated to have been built around year 820 around Karmøy, Norway. And then it sailed east to Slagenvestfold to be used in the burial around 834. The ship was sailed east and then sailed up a small river and then further portaged or moved over land on top of these log rollers and then down into the pit that had been prepared for it. They even found the log rollers under the ship in the excavation. This ship would have taken 10 smiths working about 12-hour days for anywhere between 7 months and a year to build. The keel and the strakes, or the boards along the side, were made from oak, and accents were made from beechwood. They would have needed one 50-foot long oak tree to use for the keel, which is like the main bottom runner on the ship. And then 11 16-foot long by 3-foot thick oak trees for the strakes. The strakes were about an inch thick and laid from the keel, the bottom, to the gunwale, like the edge, the top edge of the ship. And they were overlapped in what's called the lap strake technique and were nailed or riveted together very tightly with thousands of iron rivets. Now, these overlapped oak strakes essentially form the skin of the outside of the boat, and they were reinforced from the inside with naturally bent oak branches. The deck itself of the boat, as well as the mast and the 30 oars, were all made of pine. And then the entire ship was coated in black pine tar to help waterproof it. Now, the front and the back of the ship, from the figureheads all the way down to the keel at the bottom, are carved in this very intricate knotwork design of both people, animals, and various scenes in a style that has since become known as the Oseberg style. It was long thought that a ship this intricate and ornate was more of a pleasure cruise or pleasure cruiser, like a fancy royals lake vessel, something that was not seaworthy. In fact, there was an attempt in 1987, I believe, in which a replica ship was built. They attempted to sail it, and it almost immediately sank. But then a couple decades later, someone else came and looked at the ship and saw that the first one had been put together wrong. Like, they did the lap straking technique not quite right based on what the original find indicated. So in 2006, another reconstruction began with the new Oseberg Ship Foundation in Tonsberg, Norway. They started the building of the ship in full in 2010, and it took about 2 years to complete. And when it was finished, there was a great festival to celebrate it, and it was launched and successfully sailed. It is now thus believed that the original vessel was indeed seaworthy, and though not necessarily the type of ship used to cross big open oceans, like to England, for example, it was definitely able to sail the coast, sail to Denmark, different things like that. In watching a video tour of the new recreated Oseberg ship, I noticed some very interesting details that the creators included from the original ship. Under one of the floor planks was actually found this piece of graffiti, more or less, from someone who had been on the ship and had actually carved a picture of the Oseberg ship itself onto one of the boards on the deck of the ship. There's also the carving of the outline of someone's foot on the ship. And the builders of this new Oseberg ship indicated that that was a practice sometimes among the owners of the ship, that they would carve outline of the foot onto the ship. The foot itself is rather small and matches in size to some of the shoes that were found inside of the chamber that would have matched with the older woman that was found within. So with that, let's explore the chamber, its occupants, and the artifacts found within. A burial chamber was built on the deck itself of the ship, directly behind the mast. Now, it was a large wooden enclosed chamber that was furnished as a bedroom. Behind the chamber, there was a whole kitchen that was stocked with pots and pans, cups and plates, spoons, knives, as well as different foods. There was evidence of rye flour, apples and plums, blueberries, and various spices. Inside the chamber were the bones of 2 women and 2 wooden beds with blankets and feather pillows. There were tapestries with scenes of a funeral procession, among other various scenes, lining the walls. There was a chest of fine clothes, a rug, lamps. There was a chair and a stool, shoes and combs. There was a leather pouch of cannabis seeds, different musical instruments, 5 large iron ring rattles, whistles, a horn, and a bell. There were also textile tools like spindles, looms, yarn, and scissors. There were also 4 intricate carved animal heads found inside the bedchamber, with a rope passing between their mouths. These animal heads have at their end about 1.5 foot long shaft by which they could be carried or mounted for different purposes. So there were 4 of these animal heads within the chamber, and then another one found on the outside of the chamber. These were all carved by different artists and must have taken a very long time to complete, for they are incredibly intricate, and I highly recommend going and looking at some photos of them. As mentioned before, there were 2 women found within the chamber of the ship burial. Now, one was aged around 50 to 60, and the other somewhere between 70 and 80 years old. The younger one showed evidence of having a broken collarbone, as well as a fractured skull, and the older woman had a knee injury, probably occurring sometime when she was younger, as well as evidence of rather large arm muscles. Now, it has been debated whether one was a queen and one a slave, one was a queen and one was a mother, perhaps one was the queen and one was a priestess, or one was a priestess, a head of ritual ceremonies, and the other was her attendant. Now, there's no real way of knowing, although some evidence points away from the mother-daughter idea. But as far as the debate between priestess and queen, I have a lovely quote that I would like to share with you. And this comes from Hanne Aannestad, an archaeologist at the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, where the Viking Ship Museum is. And she posits the idea that while we can't tell whether they were sorceress or queen, perhaps we should recognize our modern bias of separating the secular and the religious spheres. Quote, I don't think that was the case in the Viking Age. Secular and religious power were connected. To separate them, I think, would probably be wrong. So while we can't tell for certain, I think it is definitely probable that there was some overlap in the duties of secular and religious ruler or head. So there was definitely some degree of power there, and it could have been both secular and religious power. So now, to reiterate the scene as we have it, there is a giant pit dug into the earth. A ship slid on rollers down into the pit. A chamber built behind the mast, decorated as a bedroom. A kitchen behind that. Now everything from the back of the ship forward to the mast and the door of the chamber was buried in tight-fitting sod or earthen blocks, creating half of the large burial mound, with the front of the ship sticking out into the open. Now, in appearance, it would look as if a hill had been sliced in two with a giant knife, and a ship was sailing straight out of it. And the door to the chamber was left open. With the burial space now carefully prepared, the bodies could be brought aboard. This could have been done the same day, a few days later, or even months later. The women buried within may not have even been dead yet while the ship was being prepared. At some point, the women died, and their bodies were brought into the chamber. At some point, the door to the chamber was hurriedly or drunkenly nailed shut with scrap wood. The shutting of the door could have happened before or after what is described next. Buckets and barrels and beds and tents were thrown on board, along with a saddle and harness and dog chains and collars. 4 sleighs and a large wagon with wheels were drawn on board, crushing some of the thrown items as they went. This wagon and the sleighs were carved with astounding knotwork figures that rival the carvings on the ship itself. The wagon was built 30 years prior to the burial and features, among other scenes, a plethora of cats gripping each other on the back of the wagon, and a man being attacked by a host of snakes on the front. One tapestry in the chamber depicting an elaborate procession, perhaps a funeral, shows a wagon similar to this one, with 2 women riding in it and being pulled by a horse. In Brynhild's Hell Ride in the Poetic Edda, we hear how Brynhild was burned on a wagon and then rode on the Hellway. A graphic content warning for the next 20 seconds or so. If you want to skip now, go right ahead. Perhaps the horse to pull the wagon of the 2 Oseberg women was one of the 15 horses who were beheaded on the ship. Their bodies were strewn in various places, but their heads had all been gathered into the center. Interestingly, one of these horse heads was attached by a chain to a dog's head. There were 5 other beheaded dogs as well. End graphic content. Finally, A mass of stones was thrown onto the deck, smashing many things, and sod was laid over top of the front part of the ship to match the half mound at the back that had been completed earlier. And now, at last, the women were buried. It would be over 1,000 years before this scene saw the light of day again, and perhaps the women within saw the light of a different sun as an afterlife unfolded before them. Even if the dead experienced nothing more, it is evident that this burial meant something. We have surviving stories in the Eddas and sagas of possible beliefs and reasons for practice that might point to the motives behind such a burial as this. I think I will save the reading of different burial practices as attested in the primary sources for a separate episode. So I guess we are concluding the episode for today here. I hope this episode conveyed some of my excitement for this absolutely gorgeous ship burial and the possible ritual that could have surrounded it. There is still so much mystery. I definitely encourage everyone to go look at some of the carvings and some of the different artifacts found in this ship burial. You can even take a full virtual tour of the Viking Ship Museum on the museum's website online. I had so much fun exploring all the different angles of the ship, looking at the intricate carvings. You can even see the wagon and the different sleighs there that are astoundingly carved. I mean, these pieces are so beautiful. So I hope this has inspired some excitement in you to go look into the Oseberg Ship Burial and given you a little bit of a story of its uncovering, discovery, and the practice that might have surrounded the burial itself. Thank you so much for joining me today, and look forward to next week's episode. Bye.